and the wrath of God. The Philistines, they suffer when they took the ark of God into their cities. God punished them by causing the people to have tumor, right? Suffer tumor. So the Philistines, they returned the ark to Israel. And the man of Beth Shemesh, they took this ark. But God killed 70 of the men of Beth Shemesh for looking into the ark of God. This picture of the ark of the covenant. Now in Numbers chapter 4, verse 20, God told Moses and Aaron, the Kohathites, who are Levites, must not go into the sanctuary to look at the holy things, even for a moment, or they will die. Right? So the men of this Beth Shemesh, they died because they looked into the holy things, the ark. They looked into the ark of God. Now, the men of Beth Shemesh asked, who can stand in the presence of God, this holy God? And to whom will the ark go from there? Then the men of Kiriath Jearim, they took the ark and brought it to the house of Abinadab. And then they consecrated his son Eleazar to guard the ark of the Lord. Now in 2 Samuel chapter 6, we read that King David and the whole house of Israel, they moved the ark of God out of the house of Abinadab to transfer it to the city of David. But on the way, God struck dead Uzzah, a son of Abinadab, for his irreverent act of taking hold of the ark of God when the oxen stumbled. Now in Numbers chapter 4, verse 17, God told Moses and Aaron that the Kohathites, the Levites, when they carry the things in the tent of meeting, they should not touch the holy things or they would die. Right? So God's punishment of the man of Beth Shemesh and Uzzah with death remind us that God is holy and He wants us to give Him due reverence as a holy God and to obey His commands. Right? So we have to bear in mind when we come to this sanctuary to worship God, did we give God proper reverence as a holy God? Something for us to think about. Now Psalm 15 verses 1 to 5 is a psalm of King David. And probably David talked about this psalm when the Ark of the Covenant was being brought into Jerusalem, right? As mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 6. In this Psalm 15, David was meditating over the character of the person received into the presence of God, right? Presence of God. Now, verse 1a, Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary? Who may dwell in the sanctuary, right? So David's desire was to abide in the presence of God. Probably he was thinking or remembering how Moses was in the presence of God on top of Mount Sinai, right? So David have in mind the life that lives in the presence of God. Person who walks in close fellowship with God because his heart, his mind, and his life are all in step with the heart, the mind, and the life of God. Now, the character of the person who can come before God. Verses 2 and 3. What are his character among his friends and neighbors? He whose walk is blameless, and who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from his heart, and has no slander in his tongue, who does his neighbor no wrong, and casts no slur on his fellow man. Now, verse 2a, he whose walk is blameless and who does what is righteous. So David has probably in mind two general descriptions: a person who walks uprightly and who works righteousness. Right? Now, in the Old Covenant, Old Testament, blessing and cursing are based on obedience. So we can read about this in Leviticus chapter 26 and Deuteronomy chapter 28. So the disobedient could not expect blessing, including the blessing of God's presence in their life. But in the New Covenant, blessing and relationship with God are based on the finished work of Jesus on the cross. So under the New Covenant, faith rather than performance is the basis for blessing from God. Right? So in the New Covenant, faith rather than performance is the basis for blessing. Now Ephesians chapter 3 verse 12 says, "In Jesus Christ and through faith in Him, we may approach God with freedom and confidence." Right? So God also gave us the Holy Spirit who guide us and inspire to live a life of holiness and righteousness, imitating Christ in the process of sanctification, right, until the time of our bodily death. So in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 13b, Paul said, "From the beginning, God chose you to be saved through the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit and through belief in the truth." So the presence of God. So under the New Covenant, the conduct of one's life is a reflection of his fellowship with God. 1 John 1:6 reminds us, if we claim to have fellowship with Him, yet we walk in darkness, we lie and do not live by the truth. So under the Old Covenant, a righteous walk was a precondition for fellowship with God. But under the New Covenant, a righteous walk is the result of fellowship with God founded on faith. On faith. So that is the distinction. Now, this person, Dato' Hee Chang-ki, he is presently one of the deputy chief secretary, deputy state secretary, right? Before this, he was the permanent secretary, permanent secretary, in the Ministry of Youth, Culture and Sport. Now, when he was the secretary of Cebu Municipal Council, people tried to bribe him to get contract. So those who want to bribe him, this is what Dato' He told his story. So these people sit in front of Dato' He's desk, and then underneath, the persons will kick a bundle of money towards the feet of Dato' He, and then Dato' He will kick back the bundle of money to the feet of the person who want to bribe him, and he warned them, "Don't ever do that again, otherwise I'll report you to the anti-corruption agency." So Dato' he was a man, he's a man of integrity, with righteousness, practicing righteousness and diligence. So God has blessed him and honored him by, promoting him to a very high position in the Sarawak state government. Another one is about Mr. Joseph Loy, a senior pharmacist in charge of purchase of drugs and non-drugs items for the Sarawak medical department. Now, to be impartial in considering and choosing supplier, the tenders were always open tenders. And in the tender selection committee meetings, the names of the tenderers were blocked or hidden. And then relevant people like specialists, matron, nursing sisters, were involved in the selection of drugs, uniform materials and shoes, etc. And these measures were taken to avoid corruption. So the processes of tendering and selection of tenders were fair, open, and transparent, right? So these are two examples of person of integrity, right? So when David responds to the question of verse 1, the examples of character traits are not all inclusive. There are other similar psalms, right? Psalm 24, for example, who may ascend the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to an idol or swear by what is false. And then Isaiah chapter 33 says, who of us can dwell with the consuming fire, meaning God? Who of us can dwell with everlasting burning? He who walks righteously, speaks what is right, who rejects gain from extortion, keep his hand from accepting bribes, who stop his ears against plots of murder, shut his eyes against contemplating evil. So these are the character traits mentioned in Isaiah chapter 33. Now, verses 2b and 3a speaks the truth from his heart and have no slander in his tongue. Such an upright and righteous life is known by the way that he speaks. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Boys say, I think more damage has been done to the church and its work by gossip, criticism, and slander than by any other single sin. So I say, don't do it. Bite your tongue before you criticize another Christian. Verse 3b, who does his neighbor no wrong and cast no slur on his fellow man? So righteousness is expressed in the way how we treat one another. So it's important to have practical godliness of being good, honest, and honorable to our neighbors and friends. Right? That is practical way of showing righteousness and godliness. And Jesus commands us to not only love our neighbors and friends, but also to love our enemies and those who spitefully use us in Matthew chapter 5. Now, verses 4 and 5a, his characters among difficult people, who despises a vile man, but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his oath even when it hurts, who lends his money without usury, and does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Now, verse 4a, who despises a vile man, we cannot love God unless we also oppose evil. So Proverbs chapter verse chapter 8, verse 13 says, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. So the righteous man will make his judgment about men on a godly basis, not from favoritism, flattery, or corruption. Horn say, who reject the evil, the wicked, however rich and honorable, and chose those that are well inclined, however poor and contemptible in the world. Right? Verse 4b, honors those who fear the Lord. And Spurgeon says, we must be as honest in paying respect as in paying our bills. Honor to whom honor is due. To all good men we owe a debt of honor, and we have no right to hand over what is their due to vile persons who happen to be in high places. Right? Verse 4c, who keep his oath even when it hurts. The man who keeps his promises even when it is no longer to his advantage to do so. Right? In Joshua chapter 9, we read about the Gibeonite deception. So Joshua and the elders kept their oath to the Gibeonites, though to their inconvenience. So the Gibeonites, actually they were staying near the Israelite people, but they pretend to be from a place far off. So Joshua and the elders promised that they will not kill them. But later on, when Joshua and elders found out that actually the Gibeonites were their neighbors, they have to keep their oath and not kill them, but make them their slaves to do their work. Verse 5a, who lend his money without usury and does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Many people would be considered godly in other areas of their life, but they still have not decided to use their money in a way that honors God and shows love and care to others. So usury is condemned in the Bible in the context of trading on a brother's misfortune. You just take advantage of a person's misfortune. So Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 19 says, do not charge your brother interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. Leviticus chapter 25 says, if one of your countrymen becomes poor and is unable to support himself among you, help him as you would an alien or a temporary resident, so he can continue to live among you. Do not take interest of any kind from him, but fear your God, so that your countrymen may continue to live among you. You must not lend him money at interest or sell him food at a profit. So that's the teaching, the instruction, the command of God to the Israelites. Now this verse is not concerning receiving interest for the money loan, but it's rather with whom the interest is taken from. That means you don't oppress, take advantage of the poor, the needy. So this verse concerns greed eclipsing justice. So in Nehemiah chapter 5, when the exile has returned to Israel, the wealthy were taking advantage of the poor among the exiles, when all should have been helping one another, especially the wealthy one. They should be helping the poor one instead of charging interest and taking advantage of the poor. So we should look at this list of character traits in verses 2 to 5 in Psalm 15, and then see where we have fallen short. Yet, when we see our sin in this psalm, this should drive us to Jesus, for Jesus has perfectly fulfilled the requirements of the law and the standards of this psalm. By faith, Jesus' obedience to his Father is accounted as ours. And then we are being transformed into the image of Jesus. And thus, the fulfillment of this psalm should become more and more the mark of our life. So we ourselves should aim at achieving the various character traits mentioned in this Psalm 15. The blessing that can come from this character, verse 5b, he who does these things will never be shaken. Now David has in mind the basic performance-based system of the Old Covenant. The one who has pleased God with this kind of performance can expect blessing from God. Morgan said, to continue in sin is to frustrate the very purpose of God in grace. Will never be moved. Now in the Old Covenant system, the stability of life, right, is a blessing from God given to those who are obedient to God. But under the New Covenant, the promise of stability and security is given to those who abide in faith, and such faith been evident through a life that is lived in general obedience, right? So faith that is shown through a life that is in general obedience to the instruction, the teaching of God. The righteous one will be a guest in the tent of God forever. Right? So Psalm 61 say this to remind us. And 1 John 2:17 says, the world is passing away and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. So it's important for us to know what is the will for us, and that we do carry out the will of God in our lives. So afterwards, in the discussion, you will consider these two questions. What are the character traits you need to improve on in the relationship with your family members, your friends and neighbors, and in your relationship with people who are difficult? Thank you.